My name is Susan Moe, Senior Architect and Certified Access Specialist. I will be presenting the topic signs and will cover directional and informational signs, room identification signs, and geometric symbols. At entrances, the International Symbol of Accessibility is only required in existing buildings and facilities where not all entrances are accessible. The ISA is not required at entrances in new construction. In existing buildings and facilities where not all entrances are accessible, directional signage indicating the location of the nearest accessible entrance is required. This table indicates various types of signs and whether or not they must provide tactile, visual, pictogram, or symbols in compliance with Chapter 11B. Designation signs must meet the tactile and visual provisions. Pictograms are not required, but if they are provided, they must comply. Directional and informational signs must meet the visual and symbol provisions in Chapter 11B. Exit identification must meet the tactile, visual, pictogram, and symbol requirements. Temporary signs, menus, directories, logos, company names, occupant names, seat rows, and building addresses are not required to comply with Chapter 11B. These two photographs are of two different types of signs, one directional and one identification sign. The directional sign includes an arrow that would point either to the accessible route or an accessible entrance, and also the International Symbol of Accessibility. The identification sign has braille and raised characters, includes a conference room name and the room number. This is a floor identification sign, which must meet the tactile requirements. That would include braille and raised characters. The visual requirements must also be met for the type of font and the contrast. Pictograms are not required at these types of floor identification signs. However, specific symbols are required, such as the 5-point raised star that indicates the exit floor level. The requirements for means of egress signs required by Chapter 10 are as follows. For directional signs, they must provide direction to accessible means of egress, and those provisions can be found in Section 1009.10. Doors to areas of refuge and exterior areas for assisted rescue include the ISA, and those provisions can be found in Section 1009.9. And the requirements for areas of refuge, including instructions, can be found in Section 1009.11. Additional requirements for signs required by Chapter 10 for means of egress are delayed egress locks, Section 1010.1.9.7, exit signs at doors that lead to exit passageways, exit discharge, and exit stairways, that's Section 1013.4, and stairwell identification signs are in Section 1023.9. The Division of the State Architect adopts second paragraph only for floor identification signs. These are not stairwell identification signs. These floor identification signs are intended for firefighters. Room identification signs must be mounted 48 inches minimum above the finished floor or ground surface to the baseline of the lowest braille cell, and 60 inches maximum measured to the baseline of the highest line of raised characters. Those signs with tactile characters must be located beyond the arc of the door swing, between the closed position and 45 degrees in the open position. Permanent identification signage must be located on the approach side when entering the room. This is an approved detail for a multiple accommodation toilet facility. It indicates the requirements for geometric symbols and room identification signs. Geometric symbols are required to be mounted on the door, a circle for a women's room, a triangle for a men's room, and a triangle imposed on a circle for a unisex toilet room. Room identification signs are not required, but when installed, they must comply. Pictograms are not required on these room identification signs, but again, if they are provided, they must comply. These are two photographs of non-compliant toilet room identification signs and geometric symbols. In the photograph on the right, the room identification sign is mounted too high above the finished floor. Also, there is a waste receptacle, a drinking fountain, and a dispenser that obstructs the space that is required for someone when reading the sign. The geometric symbols have pictograms and text that would require Braille and raised characters. Braille and raised characters should not be located on the door. That creates a hazard for someone who is attempting to read that Braille or touch those raised characters should the door then be opened and that person would then be hit by the door. Geometric symbols are not required at entrances to toilet and bathing rooms located within private or semi-private rooms or spaces. Those private or semi-private rooms or spaces could include, but are not limited to, toilet rooms within transient lodging guest rooms, toilet rooms within residential dwelling units, or toilet rooms within a patient sleeping room in a medical facility.